Hello, everyone. As you're coming in, we're going to wait a few minutes just to make sure everyone has a chance to log on. We'll probably start just right around 11, maybe like 1 minute after. Thanks for joining us today. Hope everyone's having a good morning. I don't know if you heard my mentioned in a couple minutes ago, but we're just going to wait about another minute or two. Really starts at 11, and we just want to make sure everyone has a chance to log on. I think we'll wait just one more minute, and then we'll get started. Well, hello and welcome. Hope everybody was able to log on easily, and welcome to our quarterly sample policy update series. We're so happy you're here and joining us for our discussion today that focuses on the June policy packet. Next slide, please. Before we get started with the content of the policies, let's go over the layout of the webinar. We will start with housekeeping and presenter introductions. Then we'll move on to a brief poll to learn more about the composition of you, the attendees. After that, we will learn about policy services and support that CSBA offers, then on to the policy updates. Before concluding, we will then conduct another poll where we are hoping for feedback as to how we are doing. And please know there will be time for questions and answers at the end of each section, as well as at the end of the full presentation. Next slide, please. So here for a few housekeeping tips. Please use the Q&A or the question and answer feature to submit your questions. As you can see from the diagram below where it's located, and the chat feature has been turned off. Your questions will be answered either in the Q&A feature in writing or by our presenters. And please know that all attendees will receive a link to the video of this webinar, as well as a copy of the slide deck or PowerPoint, whichever term you like to use. So next slide, please. And now for an introduction of our knowledgeable and thoughtful panelists. So I'm Barbara Laifman. I'm the Director of Policy Manual Development, and I will be facilitating today's webinar. We also have Dustin Bindreiff, or Erin O'Ray. Let me go in the order we have it listed. Erin O'Ray, who's the Manager of Technology Sales and Training. Dustin Bindreiff, who's the Senior Policy Manual Writer. Maryela Martinez, who's Senior Legal Services Attorney, Meghan Russell, Senior Policy Manual Writer, and Joshua Daniels, who's the Chief of our Department, Policy and Governance Technology Services. So thank you all to the panelists for being here and part of the presentation. Next slide, please. before starting with our first poll, which is what the next slide is about, we're going to do next, we thought it would be fun to do kind of a fun summertime poll to just kind of get the hang of it. So you guys have probably already participated in polls like this before, but you can basically just use your mouse, your finger pad, whatever touchpad you like to do to click on your desired result. So the first one is, what is your favorite type of summer fruit? You can choose melons, stone fruits, grapes, pineapples, or unfortunately, none of what we listed is in one of your favorites. So if you could please, we'll take just maybe about 20 seconds to do this, and then we'll look at the results, which is always kind of fun to do. Okay, why don't we have like 5 more seconds? All right, so let's look at what our favorite summer fruits are. It looks like melons and stone fruits kind of tied for first place. Then, oh, grapes had none. Wow. Then to pineapples, and oh, unfortunately, there were none of these. I know that we didn't really list berries, so maybe that was part of the problem. Anyway, thanks for participating in that poll. And now we're going to go on to our poll, which is more of a formal poll. So next slide, please. Okay, so this poll is to find out basically who you are, and if you've attended before, you know, to our webinars before. Our goal with this is that it's really going to help us to be able to focus our webinar material and presentation appropriately, so that it's most meaningful to your positions and your respective districts and county offices of education. Okay, so the first poll is, have you previously attended one or more update webinars? And the responses could be, no, this is my first one. Yes, I have previously attended 1 or 2, or the third one, yes, I have previously attended 3 or more. And then as part of the same, we're kind of doing a 2-in-1 poll. What is your role in your district or county office of education? The choices are board member, superintendent/administrator, executive assistant, or other. So let's take about, again, about 20 seconds to give you guys a chance to participate in the poll. All right, about 5 more seconds. All right, so let's wrap up this poll and look at what our results are. Okay, so it looks like, okay, so we have at least 50% are repeat attendees, which is great. Hopefully you won't find too much repetitive. We do a little bit of the general stuff each time for people who have not participated, but if we find that people are continuing to participate a lot, then some of those slides might not be necessary. We have about a quarter that are new, and then about a quarter to that have previously attended 3 or more. So this is great. So really close to 80% have participated before. So that's good to know. And it's good to know that you are finding them meaningful enough to continue to participate. And it looks like most, in terms of the role in the district, looks like most are executive assistants, which is great. We're glad that you're finding it helpful. And we will see if we can find a way to get some board members and administrators to attend. So thank you for participating in those polls, and we will move on. So next slide, please. So I'm going to introduce Erin, who's going to start off by giving us a description about the comprehensive policy services and support that CSBA offers, and using Gamma to access the update packets. I believe she's going to give us a glimpse of changes coming to the platform in June. So Erin, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending today. I'm really excited to highlight some of the new feature enhancements that we've released through Gamut Policy Plus. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. We can have the next slide, please. The first thing that we did was something that was highly requested, and we are excited to say you can now copy samples directly from the sample manual that you are working with, whether that's the district sample manual or the county sample manual, by clicking this new + add to WIP button in the sample directly. So you can pull it into draft. Next slide, please. This is also true, like I said, for the sample policy manual for counties. The + add to WIP button has been added there as well and will pull into your county manual. Next slide, please. One thing that we wanted to roll out as quickly as possible was the ability to manage the way that your exhibits are numbered. So for policy types that stack, for us, the exhibits in the regular editing format, as well as the exhibits that exist in PDF, you can now designate which order they will fall into by assigning them a number rather than having to intentionally stack them. Next slide, please. We have added a few more features for permissions as well as for the view of public users. So when your logged in users have logged into your Gamut Policy Plus module, we are now able to have you assign permissions where you can let your users view drafts, but not necessarily edit them. Editing would be in the administer this type blue area, and now the view drafts has been separated out so that they're able to view them without making any changes. For users that are accessing your site as members of the public and they don't have a username and password, they can now see an additional column on your published public manual, and that is the last review date in addition to the last revised. Next slide, please. We have included some new print options, one of them being that you can print your table of contents for your manual, and it has a lot of detail in it. So you can print sets of dates, types of policies, and combinations thereof that you're interested in knowing, and you can print that both to PDF and export it to Excel so that you're able to track all of those details. In addition, when you go to the print policies option, you can expand the sections of the policies so that you can select them individually or in any combination that you like, rather than having to print them by full section or in combination of other things. So you can just select any policies that you're interested in on an individual basis. Next slide, please. We have included the ability for you to add your logo to your policy manual, and this will look like how printouts from the meetings module look. So you will have the logo at the top in the header of your policy manual as well. Additionally, it is round updates time, as we know, and we have added the feature where you can print out the entire update release so that you get all of your supporting documents, all of your attachments, or any combination of those documents that you like, all printed together in one easy to absorb document. Next slide, please. We have made some additional changes into the work in progress page, and we have split this out into a set of features that have been enhanced for drafts and a set of features that have been enhanced for approved documents, so policies that have been adopted in your manual. For the drafts, you can see here that if you select any combination of the policies that are in draft status in your work in progress page, it will tell you the number of which you have selected, and then you can apply features to them in batches. So if you wanted to apply an adoption date to multiple drafts at once, you could select any of those drafts you want to add the adoption to, put the adoption date on it, and do it all in one fell swoop. Additionally, this goes for granting read-only permissions or granting editing permissions to users. So you'll see here for read-only and edit permissions, any users that already have those permissions are already selected, and any that are not, you are able to use the pull-down menu in those columns to select those additional users that you would like to grant those read-only or edit permissions to. And finally, if you have created a set of drafts that you've determined that you no longer need, you're able to select those in a batch and delete them from your work in progress page rather than having to go into them individually to delete them out of your draft section. Next slide, please. These features apply to the policies that already exist in your manual and are your approved, adopted, published documents. So if you select any combination of these from while you're in the approved tab in your work in progress page, you can select any number of those to update your last reviewed date all in one fell swoop or to rescind them. One thing we want to be careful about when it comes to rescinding multiple documents is that we're very intentional in only selecting the ones that you want to rescind, because if you rescind any more than that, the readopting them into your manual will have to be done on an individual policy basis. But if you have decided that you want to rescind more than one policy, you're able to do that now in a batch. Next slide, please. Now, if there are any questions or requests for training, we have every week on Wednesdays our live virtual trainings. We call them our drop-in sessions. They're at 2 p.m. and like I said, they're weekly on Wednesdays. And you can register for them beforehand by going to csba.org/webinars. We hold them every week. We have one today, for example, and we can answer any questions you may have. We will be touching on the features that have been rolled out for the extended future here, just to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to see them at work. Next slide, please. If you are working through your manual and you have realized that you have several update packets that you need to address, CSBA does have some options available for you to make that a little easier if you want to pursue these. We have something called the Policy Manual Review, which provides you with a document that is an audit that lets you know which policies you might need to update. It helps you compare your last adopted date for a document or a set of documents with CSBA's last update date for those policies. And the policy team here at CSBA compares those and helps issue a report that helps you know which ones need addressing. In addition, we have the Policy Development Workshop, which is a great way to address your entire manual in one fell swoop. And in this case, CSBA consultants will work with you side by side and develop a policy manual that's tailored to your needs and helps you go through all of the documents in those. Next slide, please. And here is a good reason for any of our users that have a Gamut Policy Plus module and are interested in seeing the way that it relates to Gamut meetings. So if you wanted to, you could combine those two modules and you would see that they connect with each other and they are very integrated and work hand in hand very well. So having everything together in one site is a major benefit. You would only have to have a set of users in one area and maintain their permissions there. It would save time, streamline your process, and you can add policies that need to be updated and go in front of your board at the next meeting. It's as simple as attaching them to your next meeting module to module. And then you're able to search across both modules using our advanced search feature in Gamut. And of course, having one place to log into remotely from anywhere also simplifies things. Next slide, please. I want to thank you for your time and for hearing about our new feature enhancements in Gamut. We're very excited. So if you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you.
And Erin, before we finish with this little particular part, there were a couple of questions that came in that I thought would be great if we could kind of squeeze it into your little section here.
Absolutely.
One is the June packet out for county offices of education? I don't see it or the district updates.
Thank you. Yes, for our COE users who are accessing their Gamut Policy Plus site as COE members, the county release will be coming shortly, if not today, then in the coming days. And that is something that you are able to see separate from the district release. If you have any interest in seeing what is in the district release, of course, you can reach out to us at Gamut for that information, but please know that all of the district policies that are included and necessary in the county release will be coming with the county release as it comes out in these next couple of days here.
Okay, great. And just one more. saying, I'm new in my role or to my role. Can I get individualized support to figure out how to use Gamut? If so, how?
Absolutely. We have a lot of resources available, including training opportunities. So if you'd like to set up yourself with an individual training, you can reach out to gamut@csba.org for that. We can give you any amount of time to do training for your users. We do them in 1-hour sessions. And if anyone additional comes into your district and needs training, we would provide that as well. So there's no cap or limit on those 1-hour sessions. Additionally, you do have the drop-in sessions on Wednesdays at 2 p.m. available to you. And you'll find that there are some resources for contacting Gamut that you can see in the question mark icon in your Gamut site. There's a phone number to reach us for Gamut support. There's an email address to reach us, gamut@csba.org. And finally, there's a knowledge base that is searchable by keyword and also searchable by module if you find that you are looking for answers after hours. So I invite you to use any one of those options or any combination of them to get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to show you around Gamut.
Okay, and one additional question just came in and then we'll move on. Is the policy manual review and policy development workshop at an additional cost?
Yes, they are. They are something that you would do a one-time cost for. And that would be something that you would discuss when you are getting more information and approaching us at CSBA for information on those services. So if you are interested in either one of those, whether it's the PMR or the workshop, please do email policy@csba.org to get all the information necessary on costs, scheduling, and everything else.
Okay, thank you so much, Erin, for your presentation and for the answering the questions. And if you do have any further questions on this, just please submit them and we'll either respond in writing or we'll try to answer them at the end of the webinar.
Thank you, Barbara.
Conclusion. Thank you so much. Okay, so next I'm going to introduce Maryela, and she is going to give us a brief description of the legal services offered by CSBA, which may result in some cost savings to your districts and county offices. So Maryela, please take it away.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you all for joining us here today. As was mentioned at the outset, and just Barbara mentioned it just now, my name is Maryela Martinez, and I am a senior legal services attorney with CSBA's Legal Services Department. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about what it is that we do, as we are a relatively new department within CSBA. So legal services is a subscription-based program, and in a nutshell, it's designed to provide CSBA members with cost-effective legal advice and resources. In order to get a little bit more specific, though, I want to let you know that as a subscriber, your district or county office has access to CSBA attorneys, and we can assist with just about every education law-related topic you can think of. Some of these are listed on the slide, and they, of course, include independent investigations, special education, Brown Act compliance, et cetera, like I said, just about every single education law-related topic you can think of. So in addition to access to us, CSBA attorneys, as a legal services subscriber, your district or county office also has unlimited access to our resource library. And this library is a repository of CBAs, MOUs, salary schedules, and legal resources, all specific to education law. It's a really great tool for labor negotiations, for general education law information and research. So we certainly invite all of our subscribers to check it out and do some research on there. We're convinced that it'll prove very useful. So if we can move on to the next slide. Okay. So as I mentioned, our services are very affordable. The subscription fee is only 10% of a district's or county office's annual CSBA membership dues for any given fiscal year. And in addition, all new legal services subscribers receive the first 3 hours of attorney time free of charge. So that's a great way for you to use our services with no cost to you. In addition to those 3 free hours, districts and county offices that are also Gamut Policy Plus subscribers get an additional 2 free hours of policy-related legal work when they sign up for legal services. So if you're doing the math, that's potentially $1,000 of legal work free of charge. Our attorney time is billed at just $200 an hour. There are other perks also that come with our subscription. I'm not going to go into them in the interest of time, but do reach out if you have any questions. You can reach us at legalservices@csba.org, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have regarding our services. So that's it for me now, and I'll turn it over to the next slide and a discussion of sample policies, the basics.
Thanks so much, Maryela. In advance of going further, just want to make sure you have our contact information in case any questions or needs your district or county office may have related to CSBA policy and or legal services, and if those arise after the conclusion of the webinar. Okay, as an introduction to the updates, let's look at a brief description of each of the documents. Okay, well, we'll start with board policies. So the board policies are the conduit by which the governing board legislates, and they articulate the policy direction of the district or county office of education. The administrative regulations are the premise upon which the superintendent implements the board policies, and they provide the necessary details while staying within the confines of the applicable board policies. And just to note that this structure may be different for county superintendents because of the different dynamics between the board and the county superintendent. There are exhibits, and these you've probably used before. They're forms, notices, and other implementation tools consistent with the specific policy and or administrative regulation to which it relates. And then there are our board bylaws, which are specific policies that provide the rules and procedures that the governing board themselves must follow. And please remember during this webinar and also in your interactions with CSBA that we say policies, and we kind of use this as a general or inclusive term for all of the documents I just explained. So it would include the policies, the ARs, the exhibits, and the board bylaws. So sometimes we say policies, meaning all of them, when we're not referring to a specific document. So just always try to keep that in mind. All right, next slide, please. Let's also do a little review of the numbering system. As you can see, within each series of numbers aligns a certain content area of the policies themselves. For example, the 5,000s are on students, 6,000s focus on instructions. Perhaps most difficult are the 4,000s. And these are for staff, and the 4,000s themselves apply to all. So if it's a 4-0 something, it would be to all certificated, classified, or managerial, supervisorial staff. But we also have them divided into categories when necessary. So we have 4,100s, which are for certificated staff, 4,200s for classified staff, and 4,300s for management and supervisorial employees. As an added complexity, some are double and triple coded. So if a certain policy would be applicable to, say, certificated and classified staff, we would call that double coded. And if it applies to all 3 types of employees, we would call that triple coded. So I hope that helps. I know the 4,000s get a little bit complex for people. And then in terms of the number of our entire manual, in terms of total policy documents, we have over 800 total documents. And in terms of code numbers, about 550. And as you know, that plays into what I was just discussing before, that for each code number, we might have more than one document. There might be a policy, a regulation, an exhibit. Usually there's a board policy. Once in a while, if it's just, I shouldn't say just, but if it focuses on procedures, we may just have an AR. But that's not the usual, but it does happen. All right, next slide, please. And let's take a look at just some general guidelines to follow when adopting policies. Please keep in mind that our policies are samples and they serve as a starting point for your district or county office. It's important to review them and, within the confines of the law, personalize them to your district or county office. Please know that our samples have gone through extensive legal review, but they don't constitute legal advice, and they become quickly out of date as new legislation and guidance is constantly evolving. Our samples contain notes, which hopefully you've seen, that provide context and description for understanding. They may be provided to board members, but please do not include them in the version that the board adopts because it's not the policy language itself. It's an explanatory note. All right, next slide, please. And now we are getting to what you're probably really here for, which is the highlights from the June policy packet. And what you're going to see on the next slide is a complete list of the policies that were updated with the June packet, categorized by section. So if we can have the next slide, please. We will be highlighting and going into more depth on certain policies for each section. And if you have any questions on any of the policies not highlighted or any of the materials that were discussed today, they can be addressed at the Q&A after each section or at the end of the presentation. And you also will have our contact information in case questions or needs arise after the conclusion of the webinar. Okay, as you can see, the presentation will be divided into 4 categories. Student opportunities, achievement and instruction, which will be led by Dustin, labor and employment, which will be led by Dustin and Maryela, operations, which will be led by Meghan and Maryela, and board governance, which will be led by Josh. So I'm going to turn it over now to Dustin for a discussion about student opportunities, achievement, and instruction.
Thank you, Barbara. Next slide, please. As Barbara mentioned, the first thing we wanted to focus on was policy updates related to student opportunities, achievement, and instruction. So I'll go through each of these in a little more detail. Next slide, please. The first one we wanted to focus on was summer learning programs, as they are important this time of year. 6177 was updated to reflect Assembly Bill 723 and Assembly Bill 373, which require a district to grant priority access for intersession programs to foster or students experiencing homelessness. In addition, if during that period the student will be moving, the student's educational rights holder will determine which school the student will attend. Also, this policy was updated to add that a district is required to provide any student who attends a school that is not operating a summer school transportation to attend at a location that is. Finally, concepts related to learning recovery were incorporated. Next slide, please. Next, regarding policy 5113, I wanted to highlight the inclusion of CSBA's new governance brief, Seize the Data, using chronic absence data to drive student engagement, which is available on the CSBA website. Additionally, this policy was updated to clarify that an absence from school is required to be excused when the absence is due to work in the entertainment industry. Finally, the policy was updated to add the requirement for teachers to provide identical or equivalent assignments and tests when a student has an excused absence. Next slide, please. Policy 5145.6 was updated to clarify the importance of effective communication from the district and/or schools to families, and that a parent or guardian's signature acknowledging the receipt of the annual notifications is not required. Notifications were added related to the items listed here. Next slide, please. BP 6000 was updated to incorporate concepts of equity and inclusions that are included in other sample policies. Additionally, this policy was updated to reflect new guidance from the California Department of Education, including the importance of coordination, collaboration, and alignment between the school, parents, and the community. More information about this guidance can be found in the policy notes. Next slide, please. Policy 6164.2 was updated to reflect Senate Bill 223, which provides flexibility for pupil personnel service holders to receive authorization to provide child welfare and attendance services. Additionally, we clarified that guidance counseling may not be differentiated based on any protected category, and that the district may not use testing or other materials that permit or require impermissible or unlawful differential treatment of students. Next, Assembly Bill 1173 requires a district with high schools to notify each community college district in its jurisdiction of the date, time, and location of any college or career fair that the district is hosting, and to provide an opportunity for the community college to participate. Assembly Bill 665 allows a minor age 12 or older to consent to outpatient mental health services without parent or guardian consent if in the opinion of a school psychologist or other professional person, the minor is mature enough to participate intelligently in those services. Finally, Assembly Bill 278 establishes the Dream Resource Grant Program, which has the goal of creating dream resource centers at schools that serve students in high school. Next slide, please. Any questions about those policies you'd like me to try to answer, Barbara?
Yeah, so a few questions came in. The first is, sorry, it says, sorry if this is an obvious question, but what are intercession programs?
Meghan, feel free to jump in if I miss something, but it's largely summer school, but they use the intercession terms because there are occasions where districts will have classes or what have you at times between mandatory school attendance. So it's a broader term, but traditionally it's largely summer school.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Okay, great. Let's go to our next question. Is CSBA's governance brief on the main page of the CSBA website, or do I have to search for it?
There's a couple options. You can find I believe you can find a link to it in the reference section of that policy that I mentioned it in, and you would have to search for it. Did you want to add something there, Meghan?
Nope, that sounds good to me.
Okay.
Yeah, and just for a general, just so people know, because this is kind of goes to the next question too. How can I find the CDE guidance referenced in concepts and rules, which is the board policy 6000? Yeah, so like Dustin suggested at the end, I believe, at the end of each policy document, we have our policy reference section, and that will list laws, websites, guidance documents, publications that have been referenced in the documents themselves and in the text of the documents. And we have tried to create as many active links as we can to go directly to those materials. So I believe that the guidance referenced in BP 6000 would be accessible through the policy reference section. If not, or for any reason your active link is not working, well, please tell us if it's not. The other is you could go to the CD's website and find it there, or Google it. It should come up. If you Google CDE and then the name of the document, but hopefully that won't be necessary. Hopefully you should be able to get it through our policy reference section. So, all right. So that is, those seem to be all the questions for this section. So Dustin, thank you for the first. And now since you're going to be presenting on the second, along with Maryela, who I'd like to introduce again for a discussion about labor and employment.
Thanks, Barbara. So these are the labor and employment related policies. And as Barbara mentioned, these can be pretty technical, and you see a lot of the double and triple coding that she mentioned early on. So we'll just jump right in, and then Maryela will provide us some additional guidance. Next slide, please. We first wanted to focus on AR 4161.1, which is also double coded as 4361.1, and there's a classified version 4261.1. The important distinction we made here with these regulations is that 4161.1 and 4361.1 apply to certificated employees, including certificated management, and that classified employees, including classified management, should use 4261. So the distinction here is classified management should not reference 4361.1, but are going to need to reference 4261 regarding personal injury and illness leave. A couple other changes. Senate Bill 848 prohibits a district from refusing to grant a request from an employee to take up to 5 days of reproductive loss leave. Additionally, new federal regulations related to Title IX require the district to treat pregnancy, childbirth, termination of pregnancy, or lactation, including any related medical condition or recovery, as it would any other temporary medical condition for job-related purposes. It was also added an employee may use sick leave days for bereavement. Finally, Senate Bill 616 extends procedural protections to employees covered by collective bargaining agreements and requires that districts that provide sick leave on an accrual basis to provide sick leave accrual at a rate of at least 40 hours or 5 days by the 200th calendar day of employment. Or for districts that credit employees with sick leave at the beginning of each year, increases paid sick leave to 40 hours or 5 days. I'll turn it over to Maryela now, and she has some additional guidance for you.
Thank you, Dustin. And I just want to mention a few more things about SB 848. As Dustin mentioned, it prohibits districts or county offices from refusing to grant a request from an employee to take up to 5 days of reproductive loss leave. And an employee is eligible for, if they've been with the district or the county office for at least 30 days, and the eligible employee is entitled to take up to 5 days. These 5 days can be taken non-consecutively, so 5 days per event, up to a total amount of 20 days within a 12-month period for this type of leave. And this bill also defines what a reproductive loss event is, and that includes a failed adoption, a failed surrogacy, a miscarriage, a stillbirth, or an unsuccessful assisted reproduction. With some exceptions, the leave must be taken within 3 months of the reproductive loss event. And here we come to an interesting fact, and that is that SB 848 is silent on whether an employer may request documentation supporting an employee's need for reproductive loss leave. Finally, all I want to mention regarding SB 848 is that it also makes an unlawful employment practice for an employer to retaliate, of course, for the exercise of an employee to the right to reproductive loss leave, or if an employee gives information or testimony as to this type of leave. So that's all I have here on this slide, and I'll turn it over to Dustin again.
Thank you, Maryela. You answered a couple of the questions already. Next slide, whenever you're ready. Okay. Policy and Regulation 4121 were updated to reflect Assembly Bill 897, requiring an employment agreement for a categorically funded program to include the expected end date of employment, the source of funding, and the nature of the categorically funded program or project. Additionally, the sick leave requirements discussed in Senate Bill 616 were added to temporary and substitute personnel, and it extends the procedural protections against retaliation to employees covered by collective bargaining agreements. In addition, the policy was updated to clarify that up to 80 hours or 10 days of sick leave may be carried over annually, but the district may limit an employee's use of sick leave to 40 hours or 5 days per year. Next slide, please. BP and Exhibit 41, 4,112.9 in the triplicate. We did not make any changes to the BP, but the exhibit was updated to reflect that this is a non-exhaustive list of notices which the law explicitly requires be provided to employees. And the main updates here were notifications related to requests for volunteers to administer albuterol or anti-seizure medication. Next slide, please. This policy was updated to acknowledge that well-trained coaches are vital to the success of the experience of students in sports and interscholastic athletic activities. And we included a definition of interscholastic athletic activities based on a district question. Assembly Bill 245 requires athletic team coaches to complete training in the use of an automated external defibrillator. Assembly Bill 1467 requires that beginning in 2027, districts provide student athletes with access to an AED device during any official practice or match when medical circumstances warrant its use, and that it's administered by a designated person who holds an AED certification. Finally, Assembly Bill 1653, which requires the California Interscholastic Federation and the Department of Education to develop guidelines, procedures, and safety standards for the prevention and management of external heat illness. Next slide, please. These policies were updated to reflect Assembly Bill 472, which requires a district that places an employee on involuntary leave of absence during the time the employee is charged with a criminal offense, is under criminal investigation, or is awaiting due to an administrative delay for necessary job-related administrative determinations. 2, upon the conclusion of the proceedings in favor of the employee, pay the employee's full compensation for the period of the involuntary leave of absence upon the employee's return to service in the district. Next slide, please. Personal leaves were updated to include that the definition of immediate family includes siblings-in-law. Senate Bill 848 allows employees to take up to 5 days of reproductive loss leave following a reproductive loss event and prohibits the district from retaliating. Finally, unless the district's leave policy does not so specify, reproductive loss leave will be unpaid unless the employee chooses to use other types of leave. Next slide, please. Policy 4218.1 was updated to add that the governing board expects employees to serve as positive role models both at school and in the community. Additionally, the Visalia Unified School District versus the Public Employees Retirement Board court decision was added. This decision held that service as a union officer constitutes protected activity under the Education Employment Relations Act for purposes of complaints of retaliation for union activities, and that retaliation solely for engaging in protected activities is prohibited. Then Assembly Bill 472 provisions related to involuntary leaves of absence were also added here. Next slide, please.
Okay, let's take a little time for questions. So thank you so much, Dustin and Maryela. There are 2 questions in this section so far. The first is, what should we do if we're made aware of a reproductive loss event, but the affected employee hasn't requested reproductive loss leave? So I don't know, Dustin or Maryela.
I guess my first thought is, if they're not required to take it, you may make them aware of the availability of it, but I would say that that's probably their decision. Is that fair to say, Maryela?
I would agree with that. It just protects the request from an employee. If the employee does not make the request, I don't think that there are well, under SB 848, there are no requirements that that the district or the county office grant those 5 days.
Okay, thank you. And then for our next question, can you please clarify? I guess this is a question. Does an employee need to utilize other leaves in order to get paid when they take reproductive loss leave? Like, could that be sick leave, vacation, and or bereavement leave?
That is correct. So it's unpaid unless the employee chooses to use some of their available sick, vacation, or bereavement.
And then just if I could add there too, this is somewhat related, but I mentioned that the leave must be taken within 3 months of the reproductive loss event. And but if prior to or immediately following that reproductive loss event, the employee is on pregnancy disability leave or leave under the California Family Rights Act, or any other entitlement under state or federal law, then the employee has to complete their reproductive loss leave within 3 months of the end date of the other leave. So they can take other leave prior to these 5 days that are addressed under this bill.
Okay, and that looks like at this point, we've answered all the questions for this section. Again, if there's anything remaining, please continue to inquire, and we can address them at the end of our presentation. And I just want to thank Dustin and Maryela for this. And then we are going to be moving on, Maryela, with you and Meghan to discuss the topic of operations.
Thanks, Barbara. So for this section, we'll be focusing on BP 1260 Educational Foundation and BP 2121 Superintendent's Contract. And then we'll briefly also discuss charter school oversight, district and school websites, and general obligation bonds, and then have time for questions at the end. So next slide, please. Proposition 28 was passed by the California voters in 2022, and Prop 28 requires the state to provide program funding to support arts and music education in schools beginning in the 2023-24 school year. As a condition of this funding, districts must annually certify that these funds will be used to supplement funding for arts education programs, and that funds expended in the prior fiscal year were in fact used to supplement, not supplant, arts education programs. And so Maryela will discuss a little bit what supplement, not supplant means in this context.
Thank you, Meghan. So as Meghan noted, as a condition of receipt of the funds, districts have to certify on an annual basis that the arts and music and school funds will be used to supplement funding for arts education programs, and that funds received in the prior fiscal year are in fact used to supplement arts education programs and not supplant existing funding for those programs. So this supplement, not supplant requirement is contained in Education Code Section 8821E. And for the purpose of the program, supplement means, just another way of putting it, really, it means that the appropriated funds must be used by LEAs to increase funding of arts education programs. So increase the funding, that is key. So at its core, what this requirement means is that schools must confirm that the amount of non-Prop 28 funds spent on arts education programs in the audit year is equal to or greater than the amount of non-Prop 28 funds spent in the prior fiscal year. So I know that that's kind of circular in a way, but the takeaway here is that Prop 28 is meant to increase the funding of arts education programs. And it's important to note that because it is kind of circular and because it is somewhat complicated, the California Department of Education itself has recommended that each district or county office seek guidance from their legal counsel now, whether that be legal services or other legal counsel. At any rate, seek legal counsel relative to their annual usage of these funds and whether they can make the certification each year regarding the supplement, not supplant requirement. So I will now turn it over to Meghan again for a discussion of resources that are available to LEAs with respect to Prop 28.
Thanks, Maryela. And you may be asking yourself, what the heck does educational foundations have anything to do with this supplement, not supplant language? And the reason that we added a note to this policy is because educational foundations are often supporting arts and music in schools with funding foundation. And so questions have arisen surrounding these new education code provisions that were adopted as part of Proposition 28. And it's in Prop 28 is intended to establish that minimum level of funding. And some districts have had questions about if educational foundations had previously been providing districts with funds that have been designated as for arts or music, and then we have this AMS funding. Can the foundations then utilize funds for different programs within the district, such as counseling or other services? So this is not a unique question. This is a question that many districts have been grappling with, and CDE has acknowledged is a question that districts have. And so they have very recently, in the last couple of months, provided these new resources, including webinars and an audit guide. And so when we updated the BP 1260, we added a note specifically addressing this Prop 28 requirement in the supplement, not supplant. And as part of those policy resources section, have added those resources noted here, including CDE's website that is specifically devoted to Proposition 28 financial and audit requirements, and also the Education Audit Appeals Audit Guide. And it has a 7-step calculation about how to demonstrate that your district is using AMS funds to supplement and not supplant arts and education funding. So next slide, please. And also is an additional changes to BP 1260 were that we updated it to note that student records or other personally identifiable student information can't be released except with parental consent or as required by district policy or law, and that student directory information may be released when appropriate. And then it's important to note also that this is a policy only and that there's no AR. Next slide, please. So we also updated BP 2121 regarding superintendent's contract. And Maryela is going to discuss SB 494.
Thank you again, Meghan. So superintendent's contracts. Education Code Section 35150 was added by SB 494. And it provides that the governing board is prohibited from taking action to terminate the superintendent without cause, and that's an important distinction, under certain circumstances. So these circumstances, what are they? Well, the board can't take action to terminate the superintendent, again, without cause, at a special or emergency meeting of the board. However, the board may take action to terminate the superintendent without cause at a regular meeting during any month in which a regular meeting of the board is not scheduled. Again, a regular meeting requiring 72 hours notice. Additionally, the governing board can't terminate a superintendent without cause within 30 days after the first convening of the board, after either an election at which one or more members of the governing board are elected, or at an election 30 days after the election when they are recalled, when one or more members are recalled. I want to note that SB 494 not only applies to superintendents, it also applies to assistant superintendents. And I would finally like to reiterate that SB 494 only affects termination of a superintendent or assistant superintendent without cause. If you are talking about termination of the superintendent or assistant superintendent for cause, that's a totally different animal, and it falls outside of the purview of SB 494. So I'll turn it over back to Meghan, and she's going to discuss the changes to the policy required by SB 494.
Thanks, Maryela. So as Maryela just discussed, there are certain prohibitions that SB 494 provides for in law, and that we have updated the BP to include, and that includes prohibiting boards from taking action to terminate the superintendent without cause at a special emergency meeting, prohibiting the board from taking action to terminate the superintendent without cause or within 30 days after first convening of a board after election at which one or more board members are elected or recalled. And also clarifying that board may take action to terminate the superintendent without cause at a regular meeting during any month in which regular meeting of a board is not scheduled. And then also as part of the update packet and process, this policy was updated to delete language related to limitations for discussing superintendent salary or other compensation in closed session, since that material exists elsewhere in our policy materials, and we felt it was duplicative here. And again, there was no AR for this policy. Excuse me. So next slide, please. So now we will try to briefly go over charter school oversight. And again, as Barbara mentioned earlier, you will receive copies of these PowerPoint presentations. So if I am just going through this information way too quickly, please note that you will receive a copy of this. So you'll have this list. And obviously this is information that is available also in the redlined copies of the policies as they're updated as well. So the board policy was updated to clarify that the superintendent may designate someone to attend meetings. We moved some information around, clarified that board approval is required for charter school to contract for administrative or other services, and amend the section materials revisions to charter. And it was also updated and clarified to delete language for which the governing board is not responsible. Next slide, please. And part of this, we also significantly updated the exhibit as well. And as part of that exhibit, we updated that it is a non-exhaustive list of legal requirements that apply to charter schools and may be used by a district to monitor charter schools' compliance with law. And then here we have a list of the things in statute that were updated. So prohibitions against discrimination in use, selection, or rejection of textbooks and instructional materials, and that was part of AB 1078, and that was heavily discussed last year, and then we incorporated that this year into charter school oversight as applicable to charter schools. And then from AB 1327, there's a standardized incident form which tracks racial discrimination, harassment, or hazing at high school sporting games. That's also applicable to charter schools. SB 114, presentation of report of annual update to local control and accountability plan and budget overview for parents, guardians, and SB 291, provision of and prohibition against denial of recess. So these are all things that you probably have heard of as applying to your district, but they also apply to charter schools as well. So districts will want to ensure that any charter schools in their district are complying with these laws as well. So next slide, please. So here's some more new statutory requirements for charter schools. I won't go through them all, but please note that you will receive a copy of these PowerPoint slides. And so we can go to the next slide as well. And that one also has more items that our exhibit was updated, including SB 10, SB 323, SB 61, which are all related to comprehensive safety plans. So SB 531, which is relating to exemption from needing valid criminal record summary, and a requirement to review and update charter school student suicide prevention policy and revise training materials to incorporate best practices identified by CDE. So there was a lot of updates to charter school oversight. So if your district does have charter schools, it is important to review those policies as well. So next slide, please. And then another policy that we tend to update annually is district and school websites. And so we have removed outdated information and updated the AR to reflect reporting of cyber attacks. And then there is also an exhibit there. And that, again, for the exhibits, we're clarifying that it's a non-exhaustive list of requirements that should be posted on district and school websites. And then we revised the Title IX regulations. We noted that AB 1327 requires districts that participate in CIF to post a standardized incident form tracking racial discrimination at high school sporting events or games. AB 1326 adds posting requirements for appointments to fill a board vacancy. AB 889 adds posting requirements regarding dangers of synthetic drugs, and AB 1466 adds posting requirements for use on seclusion and restraint of students. So next slide, please. We've also revised our policies on general obligation bonds. There's both a BP and an AR. And there's not a lot of new law in this area, but what we did through these policies is organize them for clarity, add additional details in accordance with law to kind of provide a roadmap for the district and the public. But I think it's really important to know these are really complex financial and elections situations, and then it's really important to have the help of a bond financing team. So that's somebody like a bond counsel, municipal advisory, things like that. So, and just one thing that we did add, we added a new note about the existing requirement that bond proceeds be spent only on facilities projects that are specifically listed in a bond project. And that's just from an existing court case, the taxpayers for accountable school bond fine spending versus San Diego Unified. And again, it's really important to work with bond counsel because this is what they do day in and day out. And it's a very kind of technical area of the law. The next slide, please. We also updated the AR. And again, these are existing requirements in law, but we really wanted to kind of provide a clear roadmap of the obligations for calling a bond election, what that process looks like. And that also includes that if there's a Prop 39 election, that there's a Citizens Oversight Committee as well. And then there's also some reporting requirements after a bond financing, that there's documents that go to CDAC, the California Debt and Investment Advisory Commission. But again, that's something that your bond counsel should be able to work with you on. The next slide, please. And again, more updates to the AR. We added a new section that's called ballot materials, and it really spells out what needs to be on the ballot, what needs to go in the information pamphlet, and then also something new this year, kind of a revision to what the tax rate statement is. And so that's all I have from my section on operations.
Yeah, thank you so much, Megan and Maryela, too. We do have a few questions. Let's try to go through thoroughly but efficiently because we are running a little short on time. So how should a district go about tracking Ed Foundation spending on arts and music funds to ensure we're complying with Prop 28?
Sure, I can take that one. So this is really an accounting an accounting question here, and that's something you can go on the CDE website. They have some good advice, and part of that is using locally defined SACS resources code to differentiate the expenditures, and different SACS function or goal codes to identify the program funding. And then there's also that annual audit guide that I mentioned as part of the policy resources section, that it should be linked there, and linked on CDE's website as well. And that has the 7-step process that districts can go through. And again, that's pretty detailed. There may be, CDE also has an Excel worksheet. So it is a pretty detailed process, not something that we're going to necessarily outline in our policies, but we're helping to give you a roadmap and point you to the direction that you need to go for that.
Okay, thank you. Next question. If a district starts a new foundation, would the money raised impact Prop 28 funds that we receive, or that the Education Foundation, well, actually, if the district or county office receives versus what the Ed Foundation, would receive?
I think that's a question that would respond with it depends. And so that's something you might want to ask your legal counsel about. It kind of depends what the money is, how it's given to the district, any kind of strings attached, things like that. So it's really kind of a fact specific analysis that you would want to do in that case.
Thank you. And now for our last question on this section is, will it need to be equal or greater than the money spent on arts in the current or prior audit year? I think it meaning, the funds spent in terms of supplanting or supplementing, not supplanting.
I can take that, Megan, if you'd like.
Sure.
Okay. So schools have to certify as part of this requirement that the amount of non-Prop 28 funds spent on arts education programs in the audit year, so in the current year, is equal to or greater than the amount of non-Prop 28 funds spent in the prior fiscal year. So what this means in general is that schools must use Prop 28 AMS funds for new or expanded arts programming, rather than using these funds instead of the other funds to continue arts programming. So I think that answers your question. I don't know if Megan has anything else that she would like to add.
Yeah, I think also is if the Educational Foundation doesn't provide any funds the next year, then there are no funds from the Educational Foundation. So the district wouldn't be supplanting funds if those funds don't exist. So again, it's a really kind of fact specific analysis. And I think it's important with dealing with this to look at CDE's resources and their analysis, because they're really trying to help districts with these questions, because a lot of districts are having these same questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Megan and Maryela, and for all of the questions from the attendees. I think we covered them. And now we will move on to Josh presenting, and he's going to lead a discussion about board governance and a couple of board bylaws.
Thank you, Barbara. All right, we're just going to cover 2 board bylaws, 9220, governing board elections, and then 9223, filling of vacancies. They are actually quite related, so they sort of go together. We're going to focus on 9220, governing board elections, mainly because of a new exhibit, which I'll get to in a minute. We did update the board bylaw to reference the fact that when you have a city or a county that is coterminous with a school district or a county office of education, it is possible that the city or county charter would take precedent over the local district or county policies. That's because under the home rule provision in the California Constitution, cities and counties basically have jurisdiction over local elections. So whenever you have governing board elections, you always want to take a look at, is there a city or county charter that might come into effect? The other update has to do with the Fair Maps Act, which has to sort of redistricting and sort of fairness and inclusiveness in redistricting, which happens once every 10 years. And so we included some language referencing the Fair Maps Act in part of our updates. But the biggest change is the creation of a new exhibit. And under state law, there are a number of provisions that would prohibit somebody from running or taking a seat as a governing board member. And I'm not going to go through each one, but we did include in the slides, of course, in the Exhibit 2, which are those provisions. So some come from the Constitution, some come from the Penal Code. So, for example, number 3. So, Penal Code Section 67. If you give or offer a bribe to any executive officer in the state to influence any decision made by that officer in their official capacity, that would be a crime, the conviction of which would make you ineligible to be a governing board member. There are a number of others from the Penal Code. There are some from the Government Code, some from the Elections Code. Typically, I'd say in general, they have to do with corruption and bribery and embezzlement and misuse of funds and things like that. They're not they're all in general related to public service and sort of public trust. And then we did update Board Bylaw 9223, which is the filling of vacancies. There's a new law, AB 1326, which requires certain notices be posted on the district website. We also sort of refocus this to focus on filling of vacancies by appointment rather than special election, because that is really sort of a separate process. We added some language around using a board resolution to set the procedures for selecting people to fill that that provisional appointment. And then there's some language in law that we added that we felt was important to include, referencing the fact that basically you serve until a successor has taken office. And that's really it. Nothing too complicated on these two, but wanted to make sure that we went over the differences. And I'll turn it back over to Barbara.
Thanks so much, Josh. And if there's any questions on Josh's portion or anything else, we will save them till the end, the final question and answer session. So this next slide is just a quick kind of like a sneak peek at our upcoming special packet, which will include changes based on the revised Title IX regulations that you've probably heard about. They were issued this past April and will go into effect August 1st. Substantive changes to our policy materials will reflect the clarification of protected classes, characteristics, and activities, the addition of specific requirements related to pregnancy and parenting, and the modification of grievance process requirements, including, and this is a big one, that the grievance process is required to apply for all Title IX sex discrimination allegations. Formerly, it was Title IX, the grievance procedures were required for sex-based harassment complaints that met the Title IX definition of sex-based harassment. So there's a big expansion there. Next slide, please. There's still a little bit more to go, so hang on tight. We're going to do one more poll that can help us figure out how we're doing, and it will help us improve our services to meet your needs, hopefully. So if we could really quickly just do, I know we're really towards the end here, but do this one last poll. How would you rate this webinar? 5, incredible. 4, really helpful. 3, good enough. 2, barely okay. 1, not worth my time. So let's cut it down to like 10 seconds to do the poll. Okay, we'll allow a few more seconds. And let's see what the results are just quickly, but this is really for our benefit and hopefully for us to improve our services. So do we have any results or not yet? Oh, there we go. Well, let's just look briefly. The good news is it looks like most people felt it was really helpful, a little bit incredible, a little bit good enough. And so that's looking pretty strong, but we will continue to try to get more into the incredible and less in the good enough. And luckily no one's in 2. So that's great. Thank you for participating in the poll. And let's look what we've got next. So next slide, please. It's our final question and answers. I do see one last question, which is, and Erin, this one's probably for you. How can you add the logo to your policy manual? Can this be shared or walked through?
Excellent question. Yes, we'll be happy to walk through how to engage with the new features, either in the Wednesday drop-in sessions, or you can always reach out to CSBA gamut@csba.org to schedule an individual training with that, but just for information's sake, changing out the logo can be done on the policy type administration page in your Gamut site.
Okay,
But please
great.
feel free to reach out to us anytime. We'll be happy to show you through all of the features.
Thank you so much, Erin, and for joining as a panelist to help with all these technical, but in very important features. All right, so our next slide, please. Just a big thank you for attending the June packet highlights of the quarterly sample policy update series. We hope you enjoyed it and found the webinar informative and helpful, and hope you have a great rest of your day. And thanks so much.